I'm very delighted to introduce our last but not the least speaker, Professor Michel Danino, of our very own IIT Gandhinagar. So, Professor Danino was born in France in 1956 and has been living in India since 1977 and is an Indian citizen. An independent student of Indian civilization, he authored or edited several books on protohistorical India, Indian culture, and Indian knowledge systems. Since 2011, he has been teaching courses on Indian civilization and heritage at IIT Gandhinagar, where he is currently visiting professor. He has also been assisting the Archaeological Sciences Centre that was created here in 2012. You can think of this talk, which is on the Harappan civilization as a pair to your visit to Lothal, the archaeological site in Lothal. And I hope that this talk will sort of give you a deeper perspective of that field visit that you all took on Thursday. So thank you, Michel. He really did adjust his vacation schedule to be with us at the India Ki Khoj program, and I thank you for that, Michel. Please, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is an introduction that Michel wrote himself, which is why it is a modest introduction. And I forgot to mention something that he doesn't like to mention, that he has been awarded the Padma Shri Award, which is one of the most highest, award given by the government of India in recognition for his contribution in this area. So since Michel wrote his bio, he very conveniently deleted that. So thank you, Dotona, for reminding me.
I only kept what was important.
This is important. So should I switch this off?
I think you can. If it's okay with the video, it's okay if we use this? All right, so good afternoon, everyone. And well, I suppose it's a privilege to give you the last talk. I hope you have not reached saturation point by now. And there's another irony, which is that we end with the beginning, in a way. And well, that's how it is. It's maybe a better way to understand the beginning once you have seen something of the end. Because there is a certain process which Indian civilization followed for something like, as we will see, not far from 5,000 years. So I know that you've been to Lothal, and our postdocs, Roman and Oishi, went with you. And I'm sure they have explained very competently whatever can be seen of the site. Unfortunately, much of the excavations at Lothal have been reburied because, conserving excavated site is always a huge challenge technically and demands a lot of resources which India usually doesn't really have. So the simplest way to preserve an excavation is to just rebury it. So whatever you saw is unfortunately, in fact, I'll show you a few slides of Lothal which will not correspond to what you saw as a complement. But before we start, I think we need to stop, well, glimpses, certainly, because that's all we can do in an hour or so. In the slash, because this civilization happens to have at least 4 names, and it might have had a 5th, which perhaps was the best of all. So Indus Valley civilization is what you'll often hear, but the professionals have dropped the word valley, though it remains in the popular culture, because it's absolutely not limited to the Indus Valley anymore. These were the initial sites. Then Harappan, because archaeologists have a certain tradition that they sometimes name civilizations or culture after the first discovered site. And this was Harappa in the Pakistan part of the state of Punjab. So that's another word which is kind of neutral and which many archaeologists prefer. We'll see why sometimes it is called Indus-Saraswati civilization, which has not been very widely accepted for various reasons. But lastly, in the 1930s, one archaeologist who was working on those sites at that time proposed another term, which was Proto-Indian civilization. And the name might have stuck, except that as you know, India went through a partition. And it so happens that Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, which were the first sites that were discovered, Harappa first, Mohenjo-daro just a year after, are today in Pakistan. And because of the relations between India and Pakistan, it's obvious that the Pakistani side would not accept a term like Proto-Indian civilization. So anyway, it doesn't matter. It has 3-4 names. As long as we know what we're talking about, that's all that matters. We will see this locality, which happens to be you went to Lothal. If you want to see a second important Harappan site in Gujarat, it is this one, which is Dholavira. It's far bigger than Lothal and far more impressive, but it requires spending a night there. So it's about 300 kilometers from here. So now, the other critical term here is civilization. I do not know, I'm sorry, your backgrounds. I don't know what streams of studies you're in, but could anyone throw a few things at me quickly as to what we have to understand by this word civilization, which of course is constantly debated among experts. There's no standard definition, but we can take an empirical one. In fact, I know we've had even, a great Indian at the end of the 19th century who declared that humanity had not yet reached the state of civilization at all. So in other words, there was no civilization before. So it's a bit subjective, but archaeologists have a certain fairly well defined set of criteria. For example, if you take Paleolithic paintings, some paintings in France and Spain date back to 40,000 years ago, and very elaborate paintings technically pointing to a certain high culture. But archaeologists will never call this stage of society a civilization. So what is a civilization? Can you just, yes, please? Sorry.
They have to have certain features like a government, specialized jobs, like advanced tools, writing, that kind of
Yeah, you've thrown a lot of things already. A government. So archaeologists will rather speak of a state more than a government, because that's an entity, and the government is the instrument of the state, if you like. Then you said specialized crafts, which is definitely true. And nevertheless, it doesn't mean that specialized craft did not exist a little earlier. In the Neolithic stage, which precedes the stage of civilization, you do have already some specialization. But you're right, it becomes very, very clearly defined. Writing, again, there's a bit of a dispute among experts, but let us agree that most civilizations did have writing. They need writing to keep records, bureaucratic records, trade records. So yes, it usually comes along with that. Now there's one very, very critical visible feature. What's the most visible feature of civilizations?
Monument building?
Yes. So this technically is known as urbanism, because you do have buildings earlier, but they're not monumental, and they don't, crystallize into something that you can identify as a city. So once again, you can endlessly, split hairs if you want. In the Neolithic stage, you do have villages. You have sometimes very large villages. I'll show you one in that region. You have sometimes things that begin to resemble towns. So when is a village no longer a village but a town? When is a town no longer a town but a city? So there are certain gray areas. But let's be simple. Cities, urbanism, a state, specialized crafts, writing, and what else? One or two more?
Military?
Sorry?
Military?
I'm glad you bring this up, because that's a big bone of contention among archaeologists. Some really put military as part of the and like Egypt, for example, and Greece, and China, of course, all of them had powerful military organizations. And yet this one doesn't have any trace of it. And there are a few others, like the In Central Asia, there was another contemporary civilization known as the Bactria-Marjan Archaeological Complex, or Oxus civilization, also no trace of military. So there are relative views on this.
Surplus agriculture and trade.
Yes. So surplus in agriculture very much, because cities do not grow food. And therefore, you have to have this state we've been talking of has to have some measure of control on the agricultural output and make sure that the cities are sustainable from that point of view. Otherwise, the concept of city will not work. And trade. So trade actually happens long before this stage of civilizations. In the Paleolithic already, which means, let's be simple, more than 12,000 years ago in most parts of the world, you already have some trade. It's very simple exchange, barter trade with just a few craft products, usually not much more than that. But here we see trade expanding because there are not only internal networks within one civilization, but, and this is a critical also criterion, there are external trade networks which start being established. And you find that all of these civilizations, well, not all of them at all points of time, but at some point of time, they all get in touch with each other. So this is, sorry. So this is what we've just discussed. And internal and external trade, writing, sophisticated technologies. Maybe it was implied in the specialized crafts, but it's a fact that without certain technologies appearing, and especially the one technology which corresponds to the age of civilizations is very, very in parallel, in close correlation with civilizations. What is it? I'm sorry? No, not at all, because in fact, many civilizations do not have currencies. Like this one will not have any coinage. Metallurgy, yes. So stone technology is not abandoned, it continues. They still make tools of stone, not the same, of course, as in the Paleolithic or Neolithic, but metals appear, and metals mean a whole new range of developments of tools, sometimes weapons if you have a military structure, etc. So this creates so many more possibilities in the trade, in the working of materials, and therefore, basically what it all boils down is a kind of a step in the complexification of human society. Before that, in the Neolithic, you do have complex communities, but this is nothing compared to this stage. Agricultural surplus. So anyway, there are debates and debates, but I'm just keeping it simple so that we have this in mind. And this in the Bronze Age, since we spoke of metals just now, and this is the age where copper and bronze, which as you know is an alloy of copper and tin, appear in many parts of the world independently. There are many reasons for this, which I won't go into, but in the 3rd millennium BC, and so that's 2000 to 3000 BC, which corresponds very much to the Indus, and this word valley should have gone. I borrowed this map from somewhere. So this 3rd millennium BC is very much the millennium for this civilization. At that time, you have early Egyptian civilization. In fact, it begins from about 3000 and something BC. Mesopotamia is earlier than Egyptian. The first Mesopotamian cities appear about 3500 BC or so. And China a little after, it's like 2200 BC or so, but the dates, keep evolving as excavations come up with fresh materials. So I'm not sure my knowledge is up to date as far as China is concerned. So what's interesting here, and there's another one which should figure on this map, which is in Central Asia, which is here, from about 2000 BC onward, which is the Oxus civilization I just mentioned. So what's interesting is that many of these civilizations are actually in contact at some point of time. And as you'll see a little later, especially Indus with this one, Oxus, and with Mesopotamia, this whole civilization here. But not directly with Egypt, only indirectly. So as far as the dates are concerned, this is Mesopotamia, but if we want to look at let us forget the early phases, because none of these civilizations, of course, appear overnight on the landscape. They all have long preparatory stages. And therefore, if we look at the urban phases, which is really what defines civilization, here it's 2,200 for Mesopotamia, which actually should now be 3,500 as far as I know. Egypt for the urban phase will be about 2,700, and for the mature Harappan or urban phase of the Harappan civilization is 2,600 BC. So anyway, you see that there are things happen kind of in parallel between these civilizations. There are reasons for this, the whole warming of the planet about 10, 12,000 years ago, which triggered agricultural practices at least 5, 6 different parts of the globe. And slowly population increases with a lot of agricultural produce, with animal husbandry. And once population increases, there is a tendency to create those bigger and bigger clusters, which eventually grow into cities. But please note that this doesn't concern the whole of humanity. There are many parts of humanity where the society does not feel the need to graduate, if I may say so, to the urban stage. You have a lot of tribal societies, you have a lot of island societies that are quite happy remaining in a kind of either Neolithic phase, the New Stone Age, or what is sometimes called the Chalcolithic, which is the Copper Age, just a little before the Bronze Age, where people are using chalco, that is copper, and lithic stone tools. But they are in kinds of towns. They don't feel the need to move to the next stage. So this is the background. And now, this is a map I once drew to show, it's not perfectly up to date, but almost, to show the main sites of the civilization. So please see here Harappa, which, as I said, was the very first to be discovered on a tributary of the Indus River, this huge river that flows through India today, Kashmir in particular, Ladakh, Kashmir, and Pakistan. And then Mohenjo-daro, so this is known as Punjab, all this region. This is known as Sindh in Pakistan. And then another number of sites followed. This was only in the 1920s and 1930s. And I won't have the time to tell you the very interesting story of the discovery of that civilization. And then this is the international border. So initially all these sites were in the Indus Valley, hence the name Indus Valley. But then much later, a number of other sites were discovered. This is in Balochistan, and we'll see a few of these. This is the Balochistan region of Pakistan. And as I said, 1947, this is the international border. So all of these sites went over to Pakistan. So Indian archaeologists who till then had full access and had participated in the excavations in Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, because this was all India, suddenly were left with almost nothing. Almost, because there were still two sites. One is here, Rupar, and another one here in the southern part of Gujarat. No, I'm sorry, this is it. Rangpur, very close to Lothal. These two were known before the 1947 partition between India and Pakistan. But these were the only two. So Indian archaeologists started excavating in some regions where there had been already some clues. And in particular, they found here along the dry bed of a river, which today is known as the Ghaggar Hakra River, Ghaggar in India and Hakra in Pakistan. This river had been identified with a river called the Saraswati in ancient Indian texts right in the 19th century. So I will not tell you that whole story, but it was understood that this was the relic of that river. And very strangely, along this dry bed, literally hundreds of sites of that particular Harappan culture were identified. So do not imagine that all of these sites have been excavated. In fact, only 10%, no more than 10%, perhaps even 5% of Harappan sites have been excavated. How do archaeologists identify, without excavating, that a site belongs to a particular culture, like the Harappan culture? Well, they have certain techniques of exploration. They will look at the pottery available on the surface. Sometimes they will take a trial trench to look at the chronology, the vertical chronology. They have certain techniques which are fairly reliable, though once a site is properly excavated, sometimes there are surprises. There are more phases than were thought and so on. So it's an approximate picture, and in fact, every week or month, two things happen. Fresh sites are discovered in Pakistan as well as in India, that is to say identified, and some sites disappear. They disappear, especially in the region close to Delhi. You can see Delhi here, the capital of India. Haryana is full of Harappan sites. I have only put a few of the main sites, and every week or month some sites just are razed and disappear because of very rapid expansion of Indian cities, mechanization of agriculture. Also the fact that Indian laws about archaeological sites are a bit complicated, and villagers often are a bit afraid that their land might be taken over. The communication is not very good between the government and people, on the land. And sometimes it has happened that villagers prefer to just remove a site, just dig it out and, put it all away from sight, so that they don't have this fear that perhaps their land will be taken over. There is also sometimes a kind of, hope to find treasure. And it has happened. It has happened. In fact, about 10 years ago, in Uttar Pradesh, absolutely unexpectedly, somewhere in this region here, between the Yamuna and the Ganges, a villager just plowing his field dug up some gold. And when the whole village came and started digging, they actually unearthed something like 80 to 90 kilos of gold ornaments, most of which they immediately melted and sold. But some of it, about 10% of it, was preserved. And by the time the news spread, the Archaeological Survey of India officials could come and still salvage that little bit. It's very unfortunate because why was such a hoard of gold ornaments kept there will unfortunately never be known. It's not the gold that is precious. 90 kilos of gold in a way is nothing. But it's the wealth of knowledge about the handicrafts, about the locality, about the whole process of what brought this gold here that would have been so precious, more than the gold itself. In Gujarat, this is therefore Lothal, and we are all here. And this is the site of Dholavira, which was on my very first slide, which we'll come back to. So there are many other sites which we will visit a few as we proceed. And this is the relic of this Ghaggar Hakra river, very, very visible on Google Earth, for instance, where all these Harappan sites, plenty of them, are located. This is the Yamuna River, and this is the Ganges River. So this Indus-Saraswati civilization term has been proposed and partly accepted by a number of archaeologists, but there are some controversies which I will not go into. However, this is an inventory of sites which I did some years ago. It's not up to date, but it still shows you, we are talking purely about mature Harappan, so that means urban stage sites. And it shows you that there is a kind of a balance between India and Pakistan. In fact, India seems to have more Harappan sites today than Pakistan. And Gujarat alone has a few hundreds, though some of them are of mixed culture. They are not pure Harappan, and there are criteria to define pure Harappan. Some of them are a mix between the Harappan culture and a regional culture. So these are the numbers that are there purely for the urban sites, the cities, if you like. And, but today this has grown to perhaps 1,500 or even 2,000. Nobody has a proper final inventory, and this is a list that keeps growing. We spoke of a state, and for a long time there was a thought that Mohenjo-daro, which is certainly still today the most impressive Harappan city, was perhaps the capital of this civilization, and that it was a kind of an empire. Maybe, the first influential archaeologists who worked here were British mostly. A little later, some German, French archaeologists also joined. And they were always tempted to apply to this civilization what they had learned in the Roman Empire, in the Egyptian civilization, and so on. And therefore, the word empire was used, which today is no longer quite accepted because the area is just huge. I think I forgot to bring out the area here. Yeah, this is it. 1 million square kilometers. That's huge. That's about 1/3 of modern India. It's a huge area. And it's much, much bigger than ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia were. So to keep such an area under a central capital here, when you have sites which are actually 1,500 kilometers away, would represent a huge challenge. So the current thinking is that rather there are kind of equidistant large cities like Dholavira is here, Mohenjo-daro is here, Harappa is here, there's another one here, a huge one, Rakhigarhi, which is under partial excavation at the moment in India, which is unfortunately occupied by several villages, so it's not very, very easy to have a complete idea of it. But it's a huge city, potentially as large as Mohenjo-daro, though that is not yet proved. So there seems to be, and there's another one, huge one here in Pakistan, which is called Ganwariwala. So this is just a thought, a conjecture, that perhaps these were important regional powers, and rather than a central capital, it was a kind of a confederation. Though we should not imagine a formal federated state the way we conceive it today. So this is still unknown, and the reason why this is one of the many question marks about this civilization, you will hear a few more as I proceed. The reason why there are still so many unknowns is that unlike ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, the writing of this civilization has not been deciphered. The Indus script is available only on very short inscriptions. I will show you a few. Usually, typically 4, 5, 6 signs, rarely more. The longest inscription is about 23 signs. So unlike in Mesopotamia, where you have tablets consisting of hundreds, if not thousands of signs, and they are actually pieces of literature, they are long texts, and they've been patiently deciphered. Here, the inscriptions are so short, and they are never bilingual, and therefore the real final decipherment has never been agreed upon. So therefore, it's a mute civilization. It doesn't speak to us. It speaks to us only through the material remains, nothing else. So this creates special difficulties, of course, for the archaeologists to interpret what they see. So they have to go by the material remains, and of course, urbanism is the first and most striking material relic of this civilization. So here you have a view of the upper the upper part of Mohenjo-daro, because most of these cities are divided into two. In fact, Lothal you might not have noticed, but Lothal also is divided into two. And as you first enter, and you have the, on the left you will have the warehouse, and then you see those bathing platforms. I hope you saw them. This is known as the upper part of the town. Lothal is a town, it's not a city. But still it follows the same principles. And this is above. As you move towards the lower town, you do move down, and then something, it's a different landscape altogether. So this is a pattern which was adopted across this whole civilization, this division in at least two zones, if not sometimes three, as we will see. So here you have a lot of monumental buildings, some of which I will come back to, and a further division into two parts. This is the northern part of the Acropolis or upper town, and this is the southern part of it. And the lower Mohenjo-daro will be somewhere here to the right of this screen, where most of the inhabitants will be living. This is a place of prestige. This is a place where obviously special people live. Obviously the rulers, perhaps also the high administrators, probably some of the high priests, perhaps some important traders or community leaders. There's a lot of perhaps in all this story, but this is clearly not for the common inhabitant of Mohenjo-daro. I'll show you. So this is a ground map of the important buildings, some of which we will see in brief. This was the Great Bath and the so-called Granary. This is a closer view of the so-called Granary. So why question marks? Because again, and this is a very, very major problem in archaeology. Even though you have a building in front of you, you have to interpret it. So the building is not an object of controversy. But what it was used for, who used it, all of this can be controversial. And again, our archaeologists were British archaeologists. They were used to, like John Marshall, later on Mortimer Wheeler, they were used to Roman Empire archaeology. And in the Roman Empire, you have granaries. What is a granary? It's a centrally controlled structure where the state holds the grain and distributes it to the population. So this requires a certain kind of state and a lot of control over the agricultural production. Here, in fact, there is no evidence that grain was ever stored. And today, the major, mainstream interpretation is more that it was a kind of a warehouse. And in fact, you see this division into separate platforms, just as you saw at Lothal. So there is actually no particular reason why this should be called a granary, though you will see the term in a lot of books on the Indus civilization. And then, so this is some detailed view of it, which I will skip. Then you have the so-called Great Bath complex, where there is a basin here made of very, very tightly lined bricks. There was also a mortar of gypsum over the bricks, and then some natural tar over the gypsum to make it waterproof. But again, all these terms are tricky. You see, the fact of naming something, whether it's archaeology or history, the moment you name, you've already put a bias on what you are studying. So Great Bath, great perhaps, because it seems to be a place of prestige in the whole architecture of Mohenjo-daro. But Bath might be wrong. It's a basin, 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and then you have all these cells around, one of which has a well, as you can see here. These cells were perhaps occupied by special people, priests or whatever. But initially it was conceived as a bath where, like a kind of a Turkish bath. This hypothesis was dropped the moment climatic conditions were taken into consideration. There was no need of a Turkish bath in the heat of Sindh. And so some other archaeologists said that it could be the pleasure bath of the royal family. It's quite possible, but it could be something quite different also. It could be, for example, a place for rituals, a kind of a temple pond, a basin, which was also proposed by many people. So we have to eventually, the best approach to my mind is to keep all the hypotheses always present in our mind and not necessarily decide unless there is some strong evidence towards one interpretation or another. So this is a ground plan of the Great Bath, which was certainly a very elaborate structure. And now we move to the lower area of Mohenjo-daro, where, as you see, it's quite different. It's actually still quite planned in the sense that just as in the Acropolis, I forgot to mention that the streets were oriented north-south and east-west. So here the orientation is a little bit more approximate, but still visible. And there are kind of blocks. There are blocks of houses which are organized along these streets. And those have been well studied. In fact, though it looks a bit messy, an Italian archaeologist was able to prove that there are no more than 5 to 6 ground plans of houses here. And all of them are following one or the other of these 5 to 6 house plans. From the small ones to the very largest ones, it's all very carefully planned and not randomly built at all. There's another reason why it's not randomly built. I will highlight it a little later. So here is, for example, one of the largest houses in this area. It has a central courtyard and all these rooms organized around it. But next to that, you will have, like here, for example, modest houses or medium houses. And very interestingly, as far as the architecture can inform us on the society, there doesn't seem to be a sharp demarcation between different layers of the society. Obviously, there were richer people. The traders tend to have larger homes. Perhaps, as I said, the administrators were not living here at all, but on the Acropolis. But you do not have an area where you have only large and rich houses and another area like a slum where you have only the poorest people. It doesn't seem to exist. As far as can be seen, it is all intermingling in the same areas, which is what we see here. So in other words, it looks as if, but we have to be very careful with all these statements, it looks as if the Harappan society is not highly stratified. There are different communities, no doubt. There are potters, there are metal workers, there are constructors, there are town planners. There are agriculturists, of course, in the rural settlements. There will be people managing the sanitation system, which I will show you. There are administrators, obviously. So all these specializations do exist. But it looks as if, to a large extent, they are kind of living together as in the same areas. If so, that is a remarkable feature, which is quite unlike modern Indian cities. If you go to many Indian cities, you can tell that especially the new layouts rather than the old towns, you will see that there are certain posh areas where you know that only rich people will be living, and on the contrary, you have very, very modest, if not slummy areas. So the demarcation is quite visible. So this is this large street we were looking at. And these are the relics of the buildings. No roofs have been preserved. And as you can see, this is all made of bricks. Mohenjo-daro is entirely built of bricks. mostly baked bricks, fired bricks, hundreds of millions of them. And in fact, this was one reason why the Western, especially European archaeologists who initially worked at Mohenjo-daro in the 1920s and 30s and 40s were a bit disappointed. Because you see, once they discovered this new civilization, they were hoping for something like in Egypt. You know, you have extraordinary pyramids, colossal temples, fantastic tombs, extraordinary treasures. Absolutely nothing of this exists here. So they found it a bit of a boring civilization, and one of them, Mortimer Wheeler, spoke of miles upon monotonous miles of brickwork, you know, with almost no distinctive features. So he had a kind of humorous, I mean, he was joking, but still, you could see that he is disappointed. So what makes this civilization different and are certain unique features which, you know, take a little bit more effort to identify, and we'll be doing that now. So this is an example of a small lane in Mohenjo-daro where you see several stages of reconstruction. But right here in front of you is one of these remarkable features which early archaeologists did not notice. Is there anybody here who's done some civil engineering, for example? You should be able to tell us what's absolutely remarkable about what you see here. No? So you are just like the first archaeologists, looking for treasure and seeing just plain bricks, but there's something extraordinary about these bricks. Yeah, but a bit more precisely. A bit more precisely. Look at the different layers, runners, as they are called. The manner in which they've been laid, yes, no doubt, but for them to be laid in this manner, they have to fulfill a very simple condition, which is that the length has to be twice the width. Because only if the length is twice the width can you have them alternately lengthwise and widthwise and lengthwise and widthwise. And this, in masonry, today is called the English bond, because it was considered in Europe to be a major discovery. Having bricks twice as long as they're wide, it might look perfectly obvious to you. There's nothing obvious about anything in human evolution. And this will allow you to have structurally, in structural engineering, this is known to be the strongest bond you can have with the least amount of material. If you do not have this proportion, you'll have to have many, many more, you know, much thicker walls. And even then, they may not be quite as bonded or structurally strong as they are here with just two bricks widthwise. So it should be renamed, properly speaking, it should be renamed the Harappan Bond, but the English are a bit possessive about their discovery. Anyway, that doesn't matter. There's another quite remarkable feature which took a bit of time to be properly understood, which does figure in Indian textbooks, though it's not quite well explained, which is drainage. Now, drainage did exist in Egypt and Mesopotamia, but usually it was exclusive to the place where the pharaoh lived, that is to say the palace and just immediate surroundings, or the king in Mesopotamia, but it did not exist, sanitation, drainage did not exist in the, let us say, the areas where the common people lived. Here it did. And you see here in Mohenjo-daro, these are places where bathrooms are located. I'll show you the bathroom. Bathrooms, don't imagine a modern, large, comfortable bathroom. They are very tiny bathing platforms. And I hope you saw them at Lothal. In fact, at Lothal, they tend to be a little bigger than those in Mohenjo-daro. You might have seen those square platforms as you enter the site. After passing the warehouse on your left, they would have been immediately on your right. though only 3 or 4 are left now. There was a dozen. Now what you see here is a street which has been excavated. Actually, this was all covered. Normally you won't see anything. You just see the ground. So this has been completely excavated, and these underground drains, individual drains connecting to a common drain under the street ground level is what came to light. And this is all over the city. Wherever archaeologists have excavated, they found this sanitation system. Now, there are certain conditions, because again, it doesn't seem perhaps very impressive at first sight. It's actually something quite remarkable. Because under what simple condition will a drain work? Slope, exactly. You need a slope. Now, when we have a city, and Mohenjo-daro is supposed to be about 400 hectares, nobody actually knows, because even some probings far away have still dug up some Harappan bricks. So nobody is quite sure what the final extent of Mohenjo-daro would be. We don't actually know. But if all over that extent, you have such a drainage system, how do you control the slope over such a huge area? It means, and this is the important discovery which the early archaeologists missed, that the drainage system was integrated at the initial stage of planning of the city. And today there's no doubt about it. Michael Janssen, you might have seen his name on the preceding slides. I borrowed some of his images. He's a German architect come archaeologist who did a lot of study of all these features till a few years ago. And he measured that slope, and he found that it is consistently 1 to 2 centimeters per meter all over the city. 1 to 2 centimeters per meter. Doesn't look like much, but it's enough for water to flow. And that is extraordinary. There is no Indian city today, as far as I know, modern Indian city, which can boast of such a system. I've lived in 2-3 cities, and everywhere the drainage system, most of the time, was made long after the city had somehow spread into existence. And therefore, there is no control over the slope. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, sometimes there's no slope at all. And that's why, when it rains heavily, you find all the water overflowing because they don't work. So what they did was that, if you remember well, I can just come back to this plan. All these blocks of houses were actually built on artificial platforms of bricks. This was discovered later. They were not built just on the ground. And the engineers, we have to use the word engineer, it's absolutely legitimate, who planned all the sanitation system, adjusted all the various levels of those platforms where the house were built later on to make sure that the whole sanitation system would work. So this is one of the discrete but impressive achievements of this civilization. Very elaborate town planning. And there's another important conclusion which stares at us here. We don't see them here. These are not actually manholes. It's just the bricks covering here are missing. But there will be manholes. I think I'll have a slide later on. There will be regular manholes where somebody can go down and not only inspect but clean. There will be something like if I take a cross section with a slope which I exaggerate here, there will be something like this, you see? And this is known as a sump, where any solid matter will be, the water will slow down and it will be dropped here. So you'll have a manhole, you'll have a removable slab above this. And therefore, we know for sure that there must have been a municipal force, as we would call it today. Municipal workers, sanitation workers, whatever, who would regularly go about the city and clean the drains. Otherwise, they would not have been functional. Very soon, they would get clogged, because that's what drains always do. So therefore, we have a very well-organized municipal task force all over the city, which points to a fairly strong administration, at least efficient. So these are the kind of messages that come to us. This is one house in Mohenjo-daro which is particularly large and belonged to a trader's family. This is known because some seals were found there in high concentration, and seals were used in the trade. I'll briefly mention that later. And here, what you see, there are 2-3 very interesting things here. One is this red arrow, which points to, you cannot read, perhaps this reads terracotta pipe. So they found, when they were excavating, that this particular wall had a vertical terracotta pipe. Terracotta, as you probably know, means baked clay, vertically embedded in this wall. And so the archaeologists proposed, which is the most reasonable assumption, that probably there must have been a bathroom upstairs. And water would be taken upstairs. Actually, some of these houses even had their own wells. You can see the stairs here, at least, in 1 or 2 places, here also. So this had at least 2 stories, 2 levels. And very likely the owners of this house lived on the first floor because Mohenjo-daro does not have paved roads, it's all mud roads. There must have been a lot of dust about the city, maybe some noise, we don't know. And living upstairs would be more comfortable for some people, especially those who can afford such a house. And so this points to not only an individual bathroom, but a bathroom on the first floor, which is quite amazing. The second point here is this inner courtyard. And if you travel through India, you will see that this design was adopted and repeated in many parts of India, especially rural India, where, if you go to Europe, for example, the most important part of the house is usually the facade. It's what looks outside, and you have a lot of rooms facing the facade. In this, for climatic reasons or various other reasons, it's exactly the opposite. There is no facade. You will not see anything from outside. All the rooms are inward looking, not outward looking. So architecturally speaking, this is a very Indian feature because Europe's climate is generally cold, so you want to capture the sun, you want to have more rooms facing the sunlight. Here it's exactly the opposite. There's a lot of heat, so you will not want the sunlight to enter from outside. Plus there may be a lot of dust and noise from the street again. So this is what explains this organization of rooms around a central courtyard, and that's a very, very Indian way of dealing with, especially in rural parts of India, many residences even today are organized just like that. Fortifications, as we see here from Harappa now, were discovered in several sites, and we will see Mohenjo-daro may have had fortifications, but they have not been identified as yet. However, in Harappa, some parts were found to be fortified, and Mortimer Wheeler, who was called from the Second World War front to India to head the Archaeological Survey of India. He was a brigadier, and he was a very competent archaeologist, expert in Roman Empire archaeology. And he immediately, when he discovered this, he immediately declared that this was a citadel, this is a military term, and that these were defenses. So after this, there's been a lot of debate on what are these fortifications, because as I mentioned earlier, there's not been any trace of an army. There's not been any depiction of warfare on any of the Harappan art. Do you see people fighting each other, for example? You see a lot of it in Egyptian art, Mesopotamian art. There are no weapons of war. There are no helmets, no swords, no shields. There are, of course, axes. There are various things that could be used in warfare, but they're also mainly tools, as far as is known. So there could have been defenses, maybe to protect the cities from some neighboring populations that might not have been so happy about the existence of the Harappan cities, but this is all speculation. There have been alternative proposals that some of them were used for protection against floods because many of these cities were established on the edge of fairly large rivers, not all though, some are away from rivers also, but it's probable that the important trading cities were on the edge, like Mohenjo-daro, like Harappa, Rakhigarhi, Kalibangan, we will see, and so on, were probably on the edge of rivers because of communication. You see, the rivers were the fastest way to carry goods away to other parts of the Harappan world or beyond. So there might have been partly protection against floods. They also, and this is something which I think most archaeologists agree upon, these fortifications may have been a means to control the movement of goods in and out of the cities. And this seems confirmed by the very narrow entrance into the city, which is something that will be kept in much, much later classical India. We will see some cities with the very same kind of narrowed entrance with guards' rooms on either side so that people moving in and out can be controlled. And even in classical Indian texts, we have such descriptions of guards standing at the entrance of the city and to tax the goods, they have to have a narrow entrance. So this is another interpretation. To define the urban state, the Harappans were obviously had a very strong concept of urbanism, their own concept, and maybe they were not comfortable with a city, which was undefined in space, and they needed some fortifications to say that, this is the space of the city. It's quite possible. And also, this has been proposed by an American come Russian archaeologist, Pyotr Eltsov, as a symbol of authority, perhaps. This is an interesting speculation. Anyhow, the gateways are very small. You see the worker here, for example. So this is Harappa, and this is one of the gateways where in fact, in this precise location, a number of Harappan weights, I will show you the weights in a few minutes, were found, which means that the goods were weighed. And this strengthens the interpretation of control of trade. Now, this is Kalibangan on the Saraswati or Gagar-Hakra river, which was discovered in the 1950s and excavated some 10 years later. And here again, very interestingly, we see this division between Acropolis, upper city, and lower city, which, as I said, kind of exists also. Yeah, thank you. And you find here a very interesting alignment of the streets with right angles, and at the same time, all the habitations are supposed to be in the lower part. This is again a place of prestige which is not very well understood. A lot of trade going on with through these entrances again. So this, and in fact, the proof of the trade activity is seen here. What you see is what archaeologists call luxury, the proof of luxury, which is basically something superfluous, which you don't need in your day-to-day life. And the luxury item here are those flooring tiles, which are made of terracotta, again, of baked clay. And this is something which obviously shows some economic affluence for those people to be able to afford. Lothal, I will simply take you briefly through what you saw. You must have seen this plan in the museum, so I will not spend too much time on it, except that this is definitely not to scale, and the boats are far too big compared to the actual basin. Was there any water in it when you visited it, or it was completely dry? Yeah, it's not a good dry time of the year. And you might have noticed because you came this way, you might have stood there, you might have noticed that a lot of these bricks are actually decaying. And the archaeological surveyor is not sure how best to preserve them. So this is the warehouse, and this is part of the conjectured building of the citadel or Acropolis, and this is the lower town. So this is it when it is full of water after a good monsoon. There's been some dispute on whether it was actually a dockyard where boats came up and docked to take goods, but I think this is the strongest hypothesis. I will skip the details. There's no better alternative in any case. These are some of the bathing platforms which were excavated, totally 12 of them. And you can see again the individual drains and the common drains. So whether it is Lothal or whether a small site, a town, or whether it is a huge city like Mohenjo-daro, basically these concepts are the same. And that is something very important, the sharing of a number of concepts throughout this civilization. This is the original warehouse, and fortunately the bricks you saw are recreated bricks. They are not the original ones. I believe they crumbled to a large extent after the excavation. And just a few minutes will conclude the visit through the civilization. This is the Bazaar Street, much of which is now buried again, where a lot of workshops, small habitations are located in the lower part of the town. And now Dholavira, which was my very first slide, which is that huge city, about 47 hectares within the fortifications, and nobody really knows how much outside, which is divided into now not 2, but 3 parts. The upper town or Acropolis, the middle town, and the lower town, which was mostly kept for water harvesting. So this is the difference between Dholavira and Mohenjo-daro is that Mohenjo-daro was completely made of bricks because the valley of Sindh, the Indus, is completely an alluvial valley. There is no stone material available there. Whereas Dholavira is on a small island, which is a rocky island in what is known as the Run of Kutch, very close to Pakistan today. And, you can see one of the monumental entrances into the part which is called the castle, which is this heavily fortified area here. So these are some of the guards' rooms as you enter the castle. So that is again for control of trade. This is a recreated computer image of this whole castle. Of Dholavira. These are some streets, very, again, perfectly well-aligned streets at right angles. So all these concepts are shared across the whole civilization. And this is in the middle town of Dholavira. More houses. So only the foundations have remained because they are of stone. The actual buildings, which were of bricks, have vanished by now. I think I will stop here. We don't need too many further details. Maybe we can have a few questions if you wish, and only sum up the rest of what I had planned to say that there's quite a lot of evidence of strong agricultural production and control. The main items which were grown were crops like barley and wheat. Later on, rice also comes into the picture. Quite a lot of domestication of animals for consumption, cattle and foal and even rabbits and so on. So as far as the skeletal studies of Harappan skeletons have been made, those people were quite well fed, well nourished. There's not much sign of undernourishment. There are lots of crafts, but let us say the artistic production of the Harappans was very fine, but always on a very small scale. They did not produce any monumental art as the Egyptians did. However, they had a number of trade secrets. There will not be time to talk about them, but which made some of their typical objects like the beads, especially the long carnelian beads. Carnelian is a form of agate. You might have seen them in the museum. They had the secret of drilling of these long beads. Nobody could do that the way they did it. And these beads were extremely prized in Mesopotamia, and they're found in a lot of royal graves all the way to Mesopotamia. So the Harappans were trading with what is today Iran, Iraq, much of the Gulf, like the Emirates, Oman. There's a strong Harappan presence all over that region, and a little bit with Central Asia also. They were essentially, as far as we can see, I mean, this is again a very, very partial view. Keep in mind we have only 10% of the excavated sites. Even those sites are very partly excavated. But as far as we can judge, the main occupation of the Harappans was trade, craft production and trade, not military production. And there are certain other unique cultural features, which is, for example, the complete invisibility of the rulers. You see, in Egypt, what strikes you first and foremost is the presence of the pharaoh, the deification of the pharaoh, those colossal pyramids created just for the pharaoh to be buried. There's absolutely nothing like that in the Harappan world. There is not even a single depiction of any figure of which we can safely say that this was the king, or this was the emperor, or this was whatever, the ruler. So the rulers are invisible, and yet they are very present, because we can see how the sanitation system, the drainage was maintained carefully. There's a lot of civic order, unlike perhaps modern Indian cities where things often look much more chaotic. There's a lot of evidence of civic order. For example, Mohenjo-daro, this large street had regular garbage bins made of clay, large ones where people deposited their garbage, and the garbage itself has been well researched. So there's a lot which talks about civic order and considerable amount of planning, some artistic production, and a lot of these traditions have actually survived into later India, but that would be a whole different topic. And I'll close with this, by about 2000 BC or 1900 BC, so after 6 or 7 centuries, there is a kind of decay taking place, and by 1900 BC, most of the cities are just abandoned. Either they are just emptied and people go elsewhere, or the people who keep living on the cities have reverted to a kind of village lifestyle. They are no longer living in the city as urban people, citizens of cities, but just like villagers, and they will build their homes by plundering the farmer material, not following any plans whatsoever, no more sanitation, no more of these seals characteristic. I didn't have time to show you characteristic of the Harappan trade. So a lot of things disappear. At the same time, a lot of the cultural inputs of the Harappans still get transmitted, and this has been well documented, and they survive into the later periods. So that will be a whole different topic, very interesting. But that's only what I could do to give you a kind of a taste of what is a little remarkable about this civilization, not always visible to the, it doesn't hit you the way a pyramid hits you, but nevertheless, all of these civilizations had their own very specific, well-defined developments. And it's interesting that even though some were closely in touch, for example, Mesopotamia was very closely in touch with the Harappan civilization and talks about it. In fact, in the Mesopotamian tablets, the name used for the Indus civilization is Meluha, or sometimes transcribed as Meluka. So this is the word, the name that Mesopotamian tablets use to speak of the goods that come to it from the Indus region. So they were very closely in touch, and yet they maintained their individualities so clearly. There was not much of mutual influence, except as far as some craft objects are concerned. So, and the last thing I would like to say is that this interaction, not only we see no trace of warfare within the Indus civilization, there's absolutely not a single example of man-made destruction anywhere, but its interactions with Mesopotamia or the Gulf or Central Asia seem also to happen without any military clash whatsoever. So this is something different from, for example, the interaction between Egypt and Mesopotamia was always punctuated by wars. This is a different phenomenon happening here. So why did it end? Apparently because of climatic changes. There was a big drought striking many parts of the globe from 2200 BC. This is well documented now through a number of paleoclimatic studies. All the way to North America, much of Africa, much of Asia, this whole subcontinent were affected by this drought. Of course, a drought is a relative phenomenon. Doesn't mean that there are no rains at all, but it means that there's a considerable drop in the precipitations. So this is one factor which is invoked more and more. Secondly, this Gagar, Hakra, or Saraswati River seems to have dried up about this time because suddenly all of its sites are abandoned. So there are some tectonics events which are usually used to explain this phenomenon. And all of that happening at the same time seems to have triggered a kind of a degradation in the civilization. Since we do not exactly know how it was controlled, ruled, governed over this huge region, it's very difficult to explain how the devolution took place and the loss of control, what those threads that were kind of holding it all together, how did they come apart? First of all, we would have to understand those mechanisms of integration much, much better. So until then, the exact chain of events that triggered the end of this phase of Indian urbanism remain matter of speculation. The next stage of urban development in India will be more than 1,000 years later, and this will be in the Ganges region, so to the east of this civilization, where you have cities, very ancient cities, like all of you have heard of Benares or Varanasi. There are many others. This will happen in the first millennium BC. So there's a kind of 1,000 years gap where apparently there are no cities anymore in India, and then urbanism reappears, and it's a whole different phase of Indian civilization. So this is, as I said, this is just a glimpse. If there is time for some questions, feel free.